Begin the current Daf, Mesech Beitzah Daf Yodalid. We begin 4 lines down at the top of the Yomid. We continue with the next Mishnah, this series of Mishnayos, Machlekes B'Sham Mesil, and relates to halachas of Yom Tov. Which corresponds because of Necheskel to end of Daf Hachaim, which we're joining today's Daf. So we're going to discuss in today's Daf are regarding crushing spices and salt on Yom Tov, what is permissible, and with which utensils. This should be discussed regarding the laws of Boyer on Yom Tov, Machlekes B'Sham Mesil, what methods may be used in regards to the selection. And then the next mission to discuss what types of gifts may be sent one to another and which types are forbidden. So the key terms we're discussing today's Daf are Boyer, when Lamates Malachas is selecting the good from the bad or the bad from the good. Klein is the prohibition of a mixture of different species, which specifically relates to garments. It says in the title, they all have wool and linen together. So we begin the current Daf Yodalid. 4 lines down at the top of the Yomid, where the Gemara continues with the next Mishnah, and that is a big theme of Yom Tov, which we mentioned many times, is Tzarich Eichel Nefesh, which even though it's permitted on Yom Tov, but we'll see that might require a shina, as the Mishnah begins. B'Shamei say like this: Tavlin nidreichen. Spices could be crushed in the normal way, but it needs just a small shina, just a small change, which is b'madach shel eitz, which, as the picture here illustrates on the top left, you'll see that the way they used to do it is they had a mortar and a pestle. So the pestle is the thing that you crush the spices with, and this is the mortar. So they both would be made out of stone. So Beis Shammai is saying that when it comes to the pestle, it has to be b'madach shel eitz, in a pestle of wood. That's a small little shin. You could keep the same stone mortar as it usually is, and you could keep a pestle even. It just has to be made out of wood. That's regarding spices. But v'hamelach, regarding salt, which in a place where they have very thick salt, so then it's b'pach. Here you have to do a bigger shinoi, as the Gemara is going to discuss. You have to do it in a flask of earthenware. So you're not even doing it in the mortar. It's going to be in this earthenware flask, or ba'etz apar, with a wooden spoon, a large spoon, because salt needs a bigger shinoi than that of spices. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai. Basil say more kulidik. They say no. Tavlen nidechin gedar. Spices could be crushed in the normal way, so you could have the stone pestle and the stone mortar the way you would normally crush spices during the weekday, and that is b'madach shel leven, in the pestle of stone. But b'hamelach, Basil agrees that you need to have somewhat of a shina. It has to be a little bit different than it's done during the weekday, but it's enough with a small little change, which is b'madach shel eitz, which is with the wooden pestle. So what Beis Shammai says regarding spices is what Basil says regarding salt. Okay, that's about things Beis Shammai. So do you need to have a small shinoi or a little bit bigger? Basil holds less, it's more lenient than that of Beis Shammai. And that says the Gemara, the Kula, but we see according to everyone that the halacha is melech b'yashinoi. Everyone agrees that salt needs to have somewhat of a deviation. You have to do it a little bit differently than you do it during the weekday. Beis Shammai holds a little bit more than Basil, but they both agree it needs a shinoi. My time, what's the reason? So we have Rav Huna, Rav Chizda, and Machlekes Rav Huna, Rav Chizda for the reasoning of this halacha. So Chadama one says like this. He says, Kol ader is kulam. All types of dishes that you're making, Shrichas melech, everything needs salt. So therefore, from yesterday, from Erev Yom Tov, you already knew that you're going to have to crush it, and therefore, it's not so lenient to go ahead and be crushing it today on Yom Tov. But not all pots require spices. The person doesn't know what he's going to go ahead and eat tomorrow. So therefore, we're more lenient regarding spices than we are regarding salt. That's why salt, everyone agrees, needs to have a shinoi, and if anything, a greater shinoi than that of spices. That's one interpretation. Chadam, the other man, the Amar, he said a different reasoning. He says, Kol tavlin mefigin timer. All spices, they lose their taste if you crush it the day before. Umelech in mefigin timer, but salt doesn't lose its taste. So therefore, you could have done it from before Yom Tov. So therefore, we're more machmer by salt than we are by spices. Says what's the difference between these two different interpretations? What's the reasoning? If it's because of losing taste or because you knew about this from before Yom Tov. So the Gemara says two differences. The difference between them is the Yada Mai Kadera by Lebashule. He already knew every Yom Tov what was going to be on the menu, what he was going to make on Yom Tov. So according to the first interpretation that says that the reason is because you don't know, so then you do need to have a shina, just like salt, because you knew you're going to have that spice. But according to the second interpretation, that the reason why is because spices lose their taste. I don't care if you knew you're going to have to have black pepper or cumin or whatever this and that. It's going to lose the taste from before Yom Tov, and therefore you wouldn't have to do a shina. Or Inami, another interpretation is b'merika. The difference between them would be if the spice is saffron, that they would spice the dish with this saffron, and that doesn't lose the taste if it's crushed from before Yom Tov. Now, he didn't know that he was going to use it the next day, but that's the difference between those two interpretations. According to the second interpretation, you would need to have a shinoi because it doesn't lose its taste. According to the first version, you wouldn't need a shinoi because he didn't know he was going to make it. So that would be the difference, would be, marika would be this karkam, saffron would be the opposite way, the machlekes between these two different interpretations. Now, relating to these halachas, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmol says, Kol nidoichin kedarka. Anything that you're going to crush, you could crush in a normal way. Afil melech, even salt. Says the Gemara, how could Shmuel say this? For Amr, you just said, we said according to everyone in the Mishnah, we just explained the reasoning for it. Melech bayishino, melech needs a shina to do differently than you normally do. How does you could crush it in a normal way? Says the Gemara, you're right, our Mishnah would not be like that. But Shmuel's saying like a different Tana, like the Beitzah. Amr the Meir, he disagrees with the premise of our Mishnah. He says, it's not true. They do not disagree regarding when you're crushing things. You're allowed to crush the spice in the normal way. Beishami agrees to that. And if you're crushing salt together with the spices, meaning consecutive, but you're doing it at the same timing, that even there you could crush salt in the normal way too. The whole machlekes was, if you're going to crush salt on its own in the normal way, like other spices, that was the machlekes. The Bishami say that melech, salt, is bepach, is going to have to be in a flask, and or with a wooden spoon through a shina, not in the normal way as is normally done. And moreover, it's only litzli, meaning the amount of salt that you would need for just roasting, which is less than avaloi l'kedera, but you can't crush the amount that you would need for, let's say, cooking in a pot, which require large amounts of salt. That's how Rameh holds in Beishame in regards to melech, if you could go ahead and crush it in how much quantity and with what type of utensils can you use. But again, everyone agrees, according to Rameh's version, that you're allowed to crush spice in the normal way. You can even crush salt together with the spices, but when you're crushing salt on its own, that's Beishame holds that you have to change it somewhat. But Bissel says no, you could use it. So the Gersa originally is with anything. Do you really think you could go ahead and crush the salt in anything, even something that cannot be moved on Shabbos? Al-Emano says the Gemara, no, l'chol davar, meaning even large amounts, even for the kedera. And that's what Bissel is saying, that you could crush no matter what quantity of salt. Now, but as Rashi explains, he says, well, obviously Bissel means to say that you could do it in a normal way. Meaning, he says, like we always find throughout Shas, that whatever they're disagreeing about is going to be similar to what they're not disagreeing about. Meaning, you told me that they don't disagree regarding spices and salt to be doing it at the same time, you could do it in a normal way. And then you told me, because regarding what do they disagree about is regarding crushing the salt in its own, in the normal way, that Beishame say, okay, you got to do it a little bit of shinoi with a flask. And additionally, the machmer, that it has to be the quantity of for tzli and not like a dayer. Bissel says no. L'chol davar, no matter what the quantity is, you could crush it in the normal way. And he didn't have to explain, because Bissel doesn't say that word. He only says l'chol davar, doesn't say you could do it kedarka, but we didn't have to say that because we're obviously contrasting it with by tavlim, everyone agrees, but by melech is machlekes. But what's the machlekes? To do kedarka. Because by tavlim you're saying you could do it in the normal way, and then you're saying the machlekes regarding salt. That's Rashi just adding in those blanks to explain that that's we see that Shmuel is like that Tana, meaning he's like Beis Hillel in the version of Remeir. In the version of Remeir of Beis Hillel, there's nothing that you can't crush in the normal way. That's why Shmuel had said a statement that Kol HaNedeichen Kedarkim Afil HaMelech, because that's what Beis Hillel's opinion is, that you could do even large amounts of salt in the normal way on Yom Tov. Now, additionally, the Gemara continues. It says that Omalei Ravacha Ba'arda L'Lebrei, he said to his son that although he really held like Shmuel that the halacha is that spices are allowed to be ground on Yom Tov, he was machmer, and he said Kidaiches, when you crush the salt, atzli atzluye. So tilt the mortar on the side. That's the container where you crush the salt, and then you crush like that, because again he held like Shmuel that you're really allowed to do it in the normal way in the mortar of stone, but he held that you should do a little of a shinoi and you should tilt it a little on the side. Actually, the Gemara brings the story that Rav Shesha Shammai Kal Buchna, he heard the sound of the mortar of the salt being crushed, and he said, "Hai lav migaved de beisahavi." This is not coming from my house. I know they're not doing this in my house because I told them that they shouldn't do the crushing in the stone mortar without doing a shinoi. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Maybe they were tilting the mortar. He said that he let his family do it just as make sure they tilt the mortar. Says the Gemara, no, he heard that it was a clear sound when they were crushing the salt. Had they been tilting it on the side, on the diagonal, it wouldn't have made such a clear sound, and he was able to tell that that's not coming from my house, because in my house, they don't crush the salt in the regular way on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. It says that maybe with spices, which spices doesn't even need a shin, there's only salt, which is more chamer. It says the Gemara, spices, when you're crushing the seeds, the spices, so it makes the sound in the mortar like a bark. So it has a very different crunch than that of salt. So again, he was able to discern that it was salt, not spices. And it was to tell from the sound that it was straight and not on the tilt, and therefore he knew that this is not his family that's crushing the salt. The Gemara continues, Tarabon Litna Braisa, on these halachas about grinding, crushing on Yom Tov. So ain't oisen tisni. You're not allowed to make on Yom Tov tisni, which because it's a great tircha, which you're not allowed to do a Torah gadol on Yom Tov. Which tisni is that they would pound the wheat until you would split up. It basically like it's grits. You split up the piece of wheat into like 4 different parts. Like Mar says, "My couldn't have Gimel Beis." You're not allowed to make that tisni on Yom Tov, and be'ein kaishin b'machteshes, and you're not allowed to go ahead and grind in the mortar. So Gemara says, "Tarti." There's 2 different things over here which are not similar; they're contradictory. First, you say ein leisen tisni, which sounds like tisni is when you split it into 4 parts, the piece of the kernel. But it sounds like for chilka v'daisa, which is splitting into half or into regular grits, like type of like an oatmeal, that it's not such a tircha, that would be okay. And then you say, ein kaishin b'machteshes, you're not allowed to crush anything in the mortar. Sounds like that you can't do even less than tisni. So that seems to be a contradiction. So this is what the Beitzah is saying. Ma tami noisin tisni. What's the reason why you cannot make tisni? Because you cannot go ahead and crush in the mortar because there can be a problem about teichen. So the Gemara, okay, but then belema ain't krisha b'machteshes. They then say you're not allowed to crush in the mortar, and I would know that of course you cannot make tisni because you cannot crush anything. Says the Gemara, no, itani ain't krisha b'machteshes. How we say you cannot crush in the mortar? I would have said I would have thought to say that regularly machteshes, a mortar means say the large one. But by a small mortar, I would say that would be okay even to make tisni. Therefore we have to say no. You're not allowed to make tisni at all because you cannot crush anything in the mortar. Now that mortar, that machteshes obviously doesn't make a difference if it's large or small, because the Reisha said you're not allowed to make tisni at all. So therefore, we had to say ein kosher b'machteshes because we wanted to tell you that this is not just by machteshes gedola, but even by machteshes ketana. But the Gemara rejects this interpretation because we're talking about the Braisa that says ein kosher b'machteshes gedola. You cannot grind the wheat in a large mortar. But you could crush it in a small mortar. Now, why would it be permitted in a small mortar? Because that's what's called kalach yad. It's not in the normal way, because it's usually used only for spices. And here you're taking the wheat and you're crushing it in the small mortar. You see that it is permitted. So how can you tell me the reason why we say, after you say you cannot make tisni, you say ein koshim b'machteshes, to tell you even by a small one, when you see clearly in the Beitzah that you're allowed to crush it in a small mortar? So Rabbi Amabayi says like this. He says, Ki tanya namasnita. He says, you're right. When we learned before in the Beitzah, machteshes kedai l'tanya, it was talking about by a large mortar. And don't say that it was explaining like you had said, matam, meaning originally the Gemara was trying to explain it like, oh, it's explaining. This we said you can't make tisni, oh, because in koshim b'machteshes. Why do you have to say, just say in koshim b'machteshes? No, then I would have thought to say, only by big ones, I have to tell you it's even by a small one. And then now Abai is saying, no, don't translate like that. Rather, the Bryce is saying two different halachas. It's saying you're not allowed to make tisni at all, even by a small mortar, because a tisni is to crush it into very small parts. The 4 parts, it's a big tircha to do that. So that's the first halacha of the Bryce. Then when it says, ein koshim b'machteshes, it's saying now you can't crush anything else in machteshes. For example, even not tisni, even something like daisa and chilka, which are just crushing it into, let's say, 2 parts, and when we're saying you can't do it in machteshes, is a machteshes gedola, which, because that would be a problem by toichin, but by a katana would be what's called kalach yad, would be with a shinoi, so that would be permitted. So those are the 2 different halachas that the Bryce is saying, according to Abaya, is that, the ein ois and tisni is even in the machteshes katana, but when you're saying ein koishin is the machteshes gedola, that's talking about by a large mortar, that's talking about everything else. Then come the Beis, Rabbi gives a different interpretation. He says the truth is that it is coming to explain what's called matam. And the truth is that, it's going also on a small mortar, and it's saying you can't crush at all. This that you're asking, you're saying, but we said in another Bryce that says clearly that you could crush in a small mortar, so that seems to be a contradiction of the Bryces. Says Rabbi Lekash is not difficult. Why? The second Bryce that was telling us that you're allowed to crush in a small mortar is for us, meaning us in Bavel, that we don't have slaves that will disregard the laws of Yom Tiv. So therefore, you're allowed to do it in a small mortar. Like we said, it's considered kalach yad. It is considered as a shinui. But the first Bryce that says that no, you're never allowed to crush it in a mortar, even if it's small, is for them in Eretz Yisrael, where they have servants that are mezalzel in the laws of Yom Tiv, and they make it in a large mortar, and they say, oh, we did it in a small one, and therefore in Eretz Yisrael, they said it's going to be totally usher, and therefore it's not a contradiction. It depends where you are. In Eretz Yisrael, they're going to be usher even in the Machteshes Ketana, and that was that Bryce that says you can't do it at all. The second Bryce says that you can do it in the small one. It's for the Bnei Bavel, who they're going to be careful to only use the Machteshes Ketana, and therefore we permit them to do it in the Ketana. The Gemara brings a story related that Rav Palpi, Ikla Lebei Mar Shmuel, he went to the house of the master Shmuel, and isolated daisa. They brought him this porridge, this farina. This is when you crush down the pieces of the wheat into 2 parts, and he didn't eat it. He says the Gemara b'dimah b'machteshes ketana avdua. We said, okay, tisni, which is broken up into 4 parts, those kernels of wheat, that you said you can't do it even in the machteshes ketana. But we said everything else you could crush in a small mortar. So why was Rav Papi not eating when they served him this daisa, this farina? He saw that it was ground very fine, and therefore he realized that it must have been made in a large mortar, which is awesome. Says okay, but how does he know that they made it today? Maybe they made this farina Erev Yom Tov. No, it says the Chazid have a call of tzahari. He saw that it had a shine, which was peeled and white, which able to see that it was just made today. We didn't have that brown, you have that oatmeal from yesterday in the fridge, that browned out. It didn't have that, and therefore he knew it was done today. Or if you want, you could say the reason why he didn't want to eat is because Shami Beimar Shmuel. It's different, the household of the master Shmuel, the Ika Pritzusa the Avdi. He had servants, and the servants were not meticulous in the laws of Yom Tov, and therefore he was suspecting them, and therefore he didn't want to eat it on Yom Tov. The next Mishnah, continuing on the laws of Yom Tov and Machlekes B'Shamazil, specifically regarding the laws of Boyer, is a mutter on Yom Tov l'tzarech v'nefesh to do Boyer. So it says the Mishnah, ha Boyer kitnis b'Yom Tov. If someone is selecting, picking out legumes, beans on Yom Tov, so we have a machlekes exactly how is it done. B'Shamay say Boyer oichel v'oichel. So you select the food and you eat it. Shtei says, well, discussion regarding what is the normal way of Boyer and what are we saying over here is going to be some types of shinoi. But B'Shamay say that you select the food and you eat it like that. They say, no, Boyer kadarkoi. You could select in the normal way, which sounds like that. That means to say that you're taking out the bad from the good. And you do it b'chekoi, with your lap, with b'kanon, with a funnel, b'tamch, with a large plate. Meaning you could go ahead and sort it out and in those, in a cloth in his lap, a funnel or a plate. Meaning essentially Beis Hillel is saying that the malach of Boyer is going to be mutter on Yom Tov. Now, even according to Beis Hillel, there are some restrictions midrabanan. Avalei b'tavla, you can't use a tablet, b'lei b'nafa, not with a sifter, a fine sieve, b'lei b'chvara, not with a sieve. These are ways of special tools used for sifting, because even according to Beis Hillel would be a problem because it appears like you're sifting large quantities to be used after Yom Tov, which those are problems like Uftin Nechayel. Even according to Beis Hillel, you can't do that. Now, Rabbi Leil, he says that af madiach, you could even rinse in water the shoyla, and you could have it, the waste matter float to the top, which is even a greater leniency according to many Rishonim, and therefore he's saying that even that you could do on Yom Tov. Now the Gemara explains, Tanya Lut in a Brisa, that Amram Lili says, when we say this, that they still say you're allowed to take what's called the psailas, you're allowed to take the bad stuff literally and throw it away, and you're allowed to do bar and Yom Tov, that's when you have more food than the waste matter. Hey, if you have a little waste matter, this also says, okay, you know, it's the lesser of the tirchas, so you can just take out the waste matter and you can throw it away. But if you have more waste matter than food, you have all this leftover garbage that you want, you're looking for some good pieces of food inside over there, then even Beis Hillel would agree, everyone agrees, then Beis Hillel would agree to B'Shamai, you have to take the food and leave over the waste matter. Now the Gemara asks, I don't understand, the case doesn't even make sense. If you're having more waste matter than food, Mikaman Shari, is there anyone that even permits you even to move that whole mixture? But we know this halacha batal miyut b'raiv. It's like as if everything is waste matter and nothing's fit. So forget about butter. How are you allowed to move anything, that mixture? You have like 2 small pieces of chicken and this whole bones and whatever, everything is waste matter. So how are you even allowed to move it to say that you're going to pick out the oicha from the silas? So says the Gemara, no, the Gemara has a nice equation. The Gemara says, the nafesh betircha, the waste matter is more effort because it's very thin and small, but v'zuta b'shiur, but it's actually less in quantity. So what Rabbi was saying was that when we say this is when the tircha of the eichel is meruba on the psailas, that's what Beis Hillel says, okay, take the psailas because it has less tircha. But if the tircha of the waste matter is more than the eichel, then everyone agrees that you're going to take the eichel, but it's not the quantity. The quantity can't be more of the psailas than the eichel, because they're not even allowed to move anything. The whole thing is considered as one big psailas because of the mu'id of the eichel that would be batal the meruba of the psailas. So again, it's not more, but the tircha would be more, and then Beis Hillel agrees that you have to remove the eichel because you always want to minimize the tircha. Rabbi Leil, we said in the Mishnah, he says, you could also wash it, and the kidneys doesn't have the waste matter float to the top. He says, this was the custom of the house of Rabbi Leil. They would bring a basket full of lentils, and they would float water over it. They would put water into the basket until it floated over the food items, over the lentils. And then and it would be that the food would go sink to the bottom, and the waste matter would go to the top. And that's how they would go ahead and select the good from the bad on Yom Tov. actually we learned the Beitzah says the exact opposite, that the food would float to the top and the waste matter would go to the bottom. It's not difficult. It depends what waste matter we're talking about. The second Beitzah says that the waste matter would float to the bottom was ba'afra, with earth. That would go on bottom of the food. This we said it float to the top is begile with straw. That would go and float up above the legumes, above the lentils, and therefore it's not a contradiction. It depends exactly what it was. Now look at the next Mishnah. Again, continue on the machlekes b'sham esil on the laws of Yom Tiv, specifically regarding what's called uvdin d'chayil, regarding what's considered a weekday activity and hence is not allowed to be done on Shabbos and Yom Tiv. So b'shamayim, the school of Shammai, they say ein meshalchem b'Yom Tiv. You're not allowed to send a gift, a person to his friend on Yom Tiv. Elam manos, only something that's prepared. That's why the place I'm busy with Mishleach manos. The word manos means it's prepared. It has to be ready that it can be eaten. So it's not something that would be left over for the next day. So for example, sliced pieces of meat for the guest or fish, some herring, you're allowed to go ahead and send that to your friend on Yom Tiv, but no other gifts could be sent. Mishnah says no. You could send domestic or wild animals and birds, ben chayim and shchutim, whether alive or whether slaughtered. Mishnah says you could send it all. Now, so to Meshalchin Yenes, you could send wines and shmanim and oils, vesalasas and flowers, vekitnias and legumes. I would like tavua, but not grain. Why? Because Hebrew agrees that, that wouldn't be fit for today, because you're not allowed to grind, you're not allowed to do toichin on Yom Tiv. You should have grinded it from yesterday. And it's not like spices, which it would lose its taste, so therefore there's no heter to grind it on Yom Tiv, so they still would agree that you're not allowed to send grain. Rabbi Shimon says no, you could even send grain. Why? Because you could cook it in the pot without grinding it, and you'll crush it in a small mortar, which that is permitted, and therefore Rabbi Shimon says that it has a Yom Tiv need, so they'd be allowed to send that too. Now the Gemara qualifies the Tan Rabbi Chiel, and he says this, that you're allowed to send some gifts, but ubavachli is send a b'shura. As long as you don't send the gift through many people, like in a row, because that's what's called avshamilsa. Avshamilsa is something that's why we're not going to have a washing machine making noise. It's things that make noise, and it's a big tumult. It looks like as if the guy is going to sell it in the marketplace with all these people, with all this stuff in a line. As long as you don't do that, you can send the gift. Now, the Beitzah qualifies it. It says ein shura. What does it mean in a row? It's not it's not less than 3 people. So 3 or more would be a problem, but less is not a problem. Now, Boyavashi says, yeah, okay, but what's a tlasa gavri? Let's say you send 3 people with tlasa money, with 3 dishes. What's the halacha? In other words, do we go based on each species, each dish? That's what you say you can't send with 3, and therefore he would be permitted? Meaning, just like you're allowed to send with 1 person with 1 dish, one without the other, here also would be permitted, because even though there's 3, 4, 5, 7 people, you send your whole family, all 17 kids of yours are going to the neighbor and dropping off all these stuff. Yeah, but each one's carrying a different dish, would be permitted. Or maybe you say, no, it's optionalsa. What's this whole entourage over here with all these 10 people walking with stuff? Says the Gemara, take a lesson. It's not clear when you qualify on the total amount of people, or each species is allowed to have up until 3 people carrying it to send the gift. Now, in the Mishnah, we said, Rabbi Shimon mata b'tvur. So Rabbi Shimon, he permits to send the grain, even just grain itself. Tanya learned the Beitzah, Rabbi Shimon mata b'tvur. This that he says you're allowed to send grain is going chitin. For example, wheat. Why would wheat have the Yom Tov utility if it's not crushed and not grinded? Lasman ludius, which was a certain wheat dish that you would actually take the wheat itself. And so, what's the point of barley? Is leading lefnei, you could put in front of your animal. And what's the point about dash and lentils? Is last minute this season is you can make this dish made out of lentils that grows. So again, although everyone else held that you couldn't send tavua because you're not grind it on Yom Tov, he says you don't have to. You could eat it in its whole state, and therefore it would be permitted to send it on Yom Tov. Now look at the next Mishnah, again continuing on this theme about matanos on Yom Tov. So it says the Mishnah Meshalchem Kelim. You're allowed to send garments to someone else, whether they were sewn or whether not. And even if they possess kalayim and they were shotness, as long as they could have a Yom Tov need, which Moses can explain, well, what is kalayim fit for? Kalayim you can't use, so how could have a Yom Tov need? Now, avol loi sandal, but you cannot send a shoe made out of wood that was covered with leather, hamasumar, which had these nails that were attached to it on the bottom. Now this sandal hamasumar, the reason why you can't send it on Yom Tov is because the Chacham made a gezerah that person should not wear these sandals on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Why? Because it was a story that happened, as the Gemara brings in Shabbat of Samach Man Aleph, when the Gentiles were persecuting the Jews and they were hiding, and they had these sandals with these nails, and more Jews got harmed from those nails than they did from the Gentiles. And they said no one should be wearing this when they come to Shul on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So therefore, obviously, there's no Yom Tov need to send it because no one's allowed to wear it anyway. And so too, neither can you send a shoe which is not sewn because that's not fit for anything. Clothing that's not sewn, you can still use that cloth. But a shoe that's not sewn has no utility whatsoever, therefore you cannot send that either. He adds on, he says, he says also, you cannot send a white shoe, which is also not normal to wear. The reason is because you need a craftsman, you need a shoemaker to blacken it. And no one's wearing the white before you blacken that leather. Tzachal says, there's this rule. Anything that a person would adorn themselves on Yom Tov, that you're allowed to send, but if not, then the person is not allowed to send that on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, Bishlam is different. The Gemara says, okay, you told me that you're allowed to send all types of garments, whether if they're sewn or not. So the Gemara, I understand if they're sewn, it's chazal ma, but you could wear it. Shein tfurin nami. I understand even when it's not sewn, chazal chasui, because you could use it as a blanket, as a cloth. The client, what I really don't get is that you told me that even klayim, a mixture of wool and linen, you told me as long as there's a yom tov need, you're allowed to send it. Says the Gemara, my chazal, what is it fit for? There's no, you can't use klayim. It says, we're going to say, oh, it is fit because you could double it over and you could put it to say beneath yourself. And you're right, you won't wear it, but let's say you'll have it as a cushion for your chair. Says the Gemara, no, that can't be because by the time you learn the Bryce, the Post says in the Yikra, and it says the Veged Kalayim Shatness, a garment of a mixture of wool and linen. It says in the pasuk Lo Yalo Alecha, you're not allowed to put it on top of you. Now, says the Bryce, you're right. Meikar Adin, the halach is about you actually could fold it and put it beneath you, as long as it's not over you. Aval, but this is the question. The Bryce says, but Amar Chacham, the sages say it, so it's rabbinic. Also, asking, you're not allowed to do that. Why can't you have it beneath you? Because a strand of the cloth might wrap itself over the person's skin, and either, as Rashi explains, there are large and thick strands, and they would warm up a person where he is, and that'd be over on Leisil B'Shatnas, or it could even be a regular strand. Since the primary garment benefits and warms up a person from the bottom, it's considered as part of that beged to be a levisha de isbahana, because climb's only a problem if you're wearing it and you're getting pleasure out of it. And even though this thread is not technically giving you, it'd still be considered the wearing the garment that gives you hana, and you're wearing that shatnas. So be that as an A, Chazal say you're not allowed to put it beneath you. So that can't be how it would have the Yom Tov need. And the Chitim are going to say, okay, you're right. I'm not going to have it right beneath me because you're right. A thread might go over me, but maybe the mifsik midi beini beini. Maybe it's talking about that you put another garment between yourself and the client garment, so it's like a soft, fuzzy client blanket, but I'll put something on top of that. So I know a thread won't come and roll over me. Says no, that's not either possibility. And the name of Shum Kol Kaddish B'Yerushalayim, the name of the Holy Assembly of the Kehillah of Yerushalayim. Even if you have 10 bedspreads, one on top of the other, but climb tachtein, and you have all in the bottom is climb. Asalishin aleihem, a person will sleep on them rabbinically for that same concern. They're loy plug, and therefore, so what are you telling me that you're allowed to send climb because as a tzarech hamoed? What are you going to do with the climb? Says the Gemara, ela bevilan. We're talking about that what you could do with the climb cloth is you'll use it as a curtain by the doorway, gewaldig, and you won't be wearing it. It won't be beneath you. And that's a tzarech yom tov. The person needs to have a curtain for his home. It says that's also not an option. Because Amar Ula says, why do they say that a curtain is Makabel Tumah? Meaning, why shouldn't it be Makabel Tumah? Because Mechitzas Habayis, the partitions, the walls of a house, are not Makabel Tumah. So why is a curtain in a house any different? Oh, so Ula said the reason is, because the waiter, the attendant, he warms himself up, meaning he wraps himself in the bottom of the curtain, and therefore has halachic status as a kli, and therefore a vilan is makabel tama. One thing is the Gemara's question that since you're telling me that the waiters, the attendants, the butlers, they warm themselves up with the curtain, getting you back to the question. Obviously, now make it out of Kalayim, because then he's going to be benefiting from Kalayim. So I don't understand. What's the case talking about that you told me that you could send Kalayim on Yom Tov if it's Sarach Yom Tov? The Gemara continues in Tapatet Roman Aleph, Ella Bekashin. What are we talking about over here? We're talking about harsh garments that don't warm a person up. Those are things that you're allowed to sit on. Because the problem about Kalayim anyway is, and there's a whole discussion regarding our kashan difficult, problematic or not. Is it specifically over here because you're putting it beneath you, which is anyways rabbinic? But the point is that since it's hard, it's not going to warm a person, and therefore you're allowed to put it beneath you. As the Gemara brings, it says, "Hi namdo." It's a garment called, like Rashi says, felt. This felt that's gamda, that's hard, the narosh of this place, narosh, is sharia. You're allowed to sit on it because it doesn't warm up a person. So therefore, that would be the utility of sending a garment of Kalayim on Yom Tov, because you can, if it's a hard felt, you're allowed to sit on that. Similarly, Amar Papa, he says, Ar Delayim, which Rashi says he saw in the Chubas HaGoinim, that they would wear underneath their shoes, which they would put over it the hide of the male goats, which were tanned underneath by the bottom of their shoes, by the heel, by the sole. Some would make it out of wool. That Ein Behem Mishum Kalayim, that although it has wool and linen, there's no problem about Kalayim, because again they're hard. Same reason for what we said regarding the felt. And so to Amar Rav, he says another similar halach. He says Hani Tzaradi de Pshite. He says that this garment of Kalayim that people would pile in their coins, Ein Behem Mishum Kalayim, there's no problem about Kalayim, meaning you're allowed to put it in your lap, because although you're having benefit from the warmth of that coin bag, but you're allowed to put it in your lap because the money's hard in it. It gets hardened, and therefore again it's not going to warm a person up, and therefore there's no problem with Kalayim. But the bizroni, but let's say that pouch that you put seeds into, not coins, yes, b'mishum Kalayim, that would be a problem with Kalayim, because again that doesn't make it so hard, and therefore you're not going to put it in your lap, because even holding in your lap would be warming you up. Vashiyama, he disagrees. He says no, echad zeh, echad zeh. Both of them, the pouch for coins and the pouch for seeds, ein behem mishum Kalayim. Why? He says, forget about the fact that it's not hard, but since it's not the normal way of warming a person up, therefore that wouldn't be a violation of Kalayim, and therefore a person would be allowed to put it on his lap. Thank you for any time for hosting us.